It's been over a year since Sandy Hook tragedy occurred, and I hope I'm not making anybody uncomfortable, but I'm wearing a pink shirt to keep the idea that these children and teachers who care about these children want to keep their innocence alive. Young girls love pink, and black is just too morbid. We need to think about them and how they lived their young lives, not how they died tragically. And I'm going to review some articles from the Hartford Courant that were from Saturday the 14th, Sunday the 15th, and even through this week, just honoring those lives. Starting with Change Slowly, which talks about how Connecticut in particular has grown more fearful, less confident, and more sharply divided. But it has also become more optimistic and more conscious of the world that we can't control. And while it's sad we can't control things, we need to be more conscious and see what we can do to change. So in the second half of the same article, it talks about us being more focused, and we don't really know what is changing, but the Senate rejected the bill for expanding background checks for firearms. We're not going to have someone who is unbalanced stop the rights of individuals. And I'm sorry, but I kind of disagree with that. Being a Democrat means being aware and thinking about the future and what could or could not happen, also thinking about the past and what has happened and what we can do. And having more background checks does not stop you from being able to get a gun. It just lets us know where your mental stability is and keep contact information about that. In the article, they sent love and the following page documenting the reaction. Newtown residents, librarians, historians, and homemakers banded together to collect the letters, the cards, the gifts, a sampling of everything that they possibly could, taking pictures of it, and making a monument for these young lives and a museum. And the reason being was they thought if somebody wants to come back and study the consequences of the incident, the response, that material will be available. And that's a great idea. I love it. It kind of reminds me of the breaking down of the Berlin Wall and people having bricks of the Berlin Wall, or museums for the Holocaust. They were terrible events, but we have record of it to always remember, and maybe to feel sorrow and shame, but also to never let it happen again. Also, in the documenting the reaction part of the article, it mentioned the negative feedback. I like the positive feedback of, I love you, my heart bleeds for you, I feel sorry, I was just like you, a 6-year-old said, who is now in 1st grade. Some of them said, you had broken God's laws, so you will be punished. That makes me feel so bad. In high school, I had to do a sociology report and take a negative standpoint on something that I believed about. So I had to write how I didn't believe in gay love or gay marriage. That's not true. I do believe in it. Anyone who has love in their heart should get married. But it was interesting to try and take the negative approach to those things. So I just think people need to realize that this was a not well man who acted, And while a lot of things that religious people say are God has a plan, God has all power and omniscient, they still need to think of the consequences of their writings and their reactions. And what is the point of telling them? Is it to clean up their act if you think they did wrong? That just makes me feel so sorry for you. But let's move on into a happier note. In the first opinion piece of the anniversary, Tim Hollister is talking about comforting parents, and he lost his son in a car crash. I think I mentioned it in a previous review. So Tim mentioned the 3 things that parents really want: gun control legislation, which didn't pass, but maybe we can find another way, although that's going to be something with the Constitution and the Second Amendment. School security improvements, we're making those with more funding from the federal government, and a lot of school districts have allocated that money for in-school guards. Thirdly, diagnosing mental illness, and that could be a tricky thing, but we have community schools, we've got outpatient programs, we have our requirement to diagnose students when they are young and all the way through to their transitional time, or from high school and leaving to go to the real world. The last point that Tim makes is what we can do to help those parents to feel better. And some of these are simple, but we don't think about them. Like providing support without imposing any expectations of when they should get over it. I know when my sister was in college, she had a boyfriend who was drunk driving, and he went straight into a brick wall and died on impact. My family and I rushed up to see her and console her, and it took her a very long time to get over this accident and death. And to this day, she sometimes mentions him. And we should not put our feelings of when they need to get over this death on these parents. We need to let them grieve and let them have their own time. It's okay to think of them. My father told me that his father knew he was dying back in the day. I think that was in 1988. And my grandfather told my father, "It's okay to think of me once in a while, but don't dwell on me." So Tim's second advice is reminders on special days that the child's life still matters. So celebrate their birthdays. Their birthday still happens, even if they're gone, just like grandparents. My family celebrates Christmas Eve, though it is a Christian holiday and we are Jewish. We celebrate it because my grandparents were married on Christmas Eve. Both of them are deceased, but we still want to celebrate their lives and their love coincided with Christmas Eve, so we celebrate. The last point Tim makes is create appropriate and lasting memorials. So don't just give presents that can tatter and wither and go away, or food items that are eaten or kind of rot and go away. That's why I like the Jewish tradition. When you go to a gravesite, you don't give flowers. Flowers, once cut, start to die. And to give death to death is very morbid. So what Jewish people do is they give a pebble. We come from the ground and we go to the ground. So a pebble is symbolic of that. And while we know the rock cycle, if you want to call it a cycle, rocks are around for a long, long time, and when they're not rocks anymore, they turn into salt, sand, what have you, or they can turn into gems. I'd rather you think about them turning into gems, and these young children were gems themselves. Town, A Quiet Day to Remember, Richard Harwood talks about basically the same things that our last friend talked about, and how parents don't have an escape from the memories or the losses, so give them a time to feel. The path calls for courage and restraint, about compassion on a sad day. I connected the two pieces. Is talking about how Newtown has become the new ground zero for compassion. I like how they used the term ground zero because after the wake of 9/11, there was a swell of compassion, and I saw that same swell after Newtown, and I would have hoped that it would continue a year later, but I guess history repeated itself, and in 2002, I didn't see compassion as much, and in 2013, we don't see compassion as much for Sandy Hook, especially with the idea that we just released the police telephone calls from that day. And some of the families may view that as heartbreaking to hear their loved ones on the phone, those 6 teachers. But they tried to stop it, put injunctions in, and maybe those phone calls can help someone and realize I heard some of them, and voices didn't seem too sad. They seemed ready and confident that they were going to get help. Almost forgotten about Storm Sandy and its devastating effects were right around the time of the Sandy Hook tragedy. So, in the 3-page article, Reclaiming Joy on Playground, there was a playground built with so many children taking part in it and taking joy in it. The article is really cute, and it talks about a girl, Lauren Wyatt, who pressed her hands in some wet cement to make it her own and honor her sister, Allison, who passed away at the tragedy. And they want all of these playgrounds to represent childhood, innocence, and hope. In A Place for Joy, where the article continues, how you can turn a tragedy into something beautiful, turn it into something to be paid forward to other children, and I love that too. And learning from Mississippi that the playground isn't just a structure, it's a symbol of recovery and hope. I love that sentiment. Laven's. Before I finish, there was a picture in one of the memorials with a child who drew a picture of himself with open arms, hugging and loving people, and there was a picture taken of him doing the same thing. His drawing and the picture of him are next to each other in a welcoming to the playground where it resides. And I like the idea of having children with open arms welcoming other children for generations to come.